And that's because we are ready to declare that Stephen McNeil is going to be the next Premier of Nova Scotia, the first Liberal Premier since Russell McClellan. And we are not ready to declare majority minority, but Sun News Network is saying that it is going to be a Liberal government in Nova Scotia tomorrow. So we're going to have to see who's going to be the finance minister. Diana Whalen, perhaps, who knows? Brian Lilly, looking at the results all night, it's been right from the get-go. It's been all Liberal.
And the happiest man going, other than Steve McNeil tonight, might be David Coletto and his colleagues in the polling industry.
We were talking about this. 3 pollsters were active in the Nova Scotia election. One of them is a guy named Don Mills, runs a firm called Corporate Research Associates. And David Coletto had his Alberta moment in Alberta and his BC moment in BC. He was active there. But Don Mills has benefited from the fact of those problems. He's never had a problem. So good for Don. He's maintaining his reputation. I don't think he was as accurate as David in the numbers, but that's splitting hairs. The pollsters seem to have got the general theory
right. Yeah.
Right. So Stephen McNeil is as the government, and I guess now is he too has problems. Now he wants this challenge. How come there's all those Nova Scotians working in the oil patch? What can we do to cut spending and still maintain tax revenue? There's a lot of problems for Nova Scotia.
Well, and the number one issue for Nova Scotians, as identified in David Coletto's poll, was jobs. So how do you go about creating the right conditions for jobs to show up in Nova Scotia again? As I was saying to you earlier, 8.7% unemployment rate, higher outside of Halifax. That's a real concern. A third of the population is in the Halifax area, but you got 2/3 spread around the rest of the province. People want to work. If there are jobs, then maybe people aren't going out west, and of course west means everything from New Brunswick all the way to British Columbia.
Right, exactly. One person, one of our friends, John Robson, gave high praise to Stephen McNeil, and you don't often see John Robson giving high praise to a politician, B, a Liberal politician.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons was, and not a lot of people know, Stephen McNeil's background was he owned a small appliance repair shop. He was a small business owner, and what John liked, it was doing things with your hand, work of a craftsman, which we don't often see nowadays. I'm trying to think. I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but a lot of our politicians, Stephen Harper, economists, they're thinky people, they're professional politicians. Stephen McNeil had a long life fixing stuff, making people happy with your toaster now works again, sir. You know what I mean?
As David Danewall was telling me, he said this is a guy who's not a lawyer. And that goes a long way outside of Halifax.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Brian Lilly, thank you so much. Let's go to Stephen McNeil's headquarters. Paige McPherson is our reporter who's been watching this thing up close for the entire campaign. Paige, I'm assuming you're at a fun place to be.
Yes, absolutely. As you can see behind me, it's a very excited scene. Really, the people have been filling into the room. There's cheers every time results start rolling in. As I mentioned, definitely a happy mood here. And we are, of course, expecting Liberal leader Stephen McNeil sooner than later. At this point, as you can see behind me, they've got the red velvet rope rolled out for him, the red carpet there, and there are supporters there waiting for him to come in, almost like a celebrity. Definitely a big deal in Nova Scotia tonight.
Paige McPherson, thank you so much. All right, so we know who the government is going to be, and the Premier, it's going to be Stephen McNeil. It's going to be a Liberal government. It's going to put a little spring in the step of Liberals across the country who saw Jean Charest, a Liberal Premier, lose in Quebec. I know Christy Clark is a Liberal by name, but not really a Liberal the way, say, Justin Trudeau's a Liberal. You know what I mean, you political junkies. In any event, Justin Trudeau was out there campaigning with Stephen McNeil, so great for that brand if you're cheering for them. A good night for those folks. Not a great night again for New Democrats. And again, we want to repeat that Darrell Dexter's seat is still very much in play. He is trailing. Bryn Weiss is standing by at NDP headquarters. And Bryn, right now the NDP are not even the official opposition. And really that's where the story, I think, is shifted now. Will the NDP be official opposition? Will they go from first to worst and be the third party again in the legislature?
Yeah, that's right, David. Things are going from bad to worse here for the NDP. As you mentioned, Darrell Dexter's seat is in play, and right now they are in third, according to the most recent results that we're seeing. They're not even, right now anyway, the official opposition. So that would be, of course, a stunning rejection of the NDP here in Nova Scotia. Remember, they had 31 seats, David, at dissolution, and right now we're talking about less than 10, perhaps, for the NDP. They've lost a number of seats here in Halifax, and And also, David, there's someone yelling behind me here, supporter of the NDP, who perhaps wished the results were a little different. But the other important note here, David, of course, when it comes to Darrell Dexter, is what will he do tonight? His political future is going to be obviously a big question here if he loses the way we're seeing these numbers come in right now. If he loses so badly, if he loses his own seat, it's expected perhaps that his political future could be at risk here.
Bryn Weiss, thank you so much. And we should point out there's more than half the polls reporting now. I think 32 or so of 56 polls in Dexter's riding, and he's still behind by a couple of hundred. So who knows what. Bryn, in all the reporting we've done over the last week, maybe we should have paid attention to this storyline a bit more, but let me ask you about it nonetheless, is after Dexter, who for the NDP? A lot of people say Graham Steele, who was the finance minister for Darrell Dexter but decided not to run in this election, represented what is now Halifax-Armdale. Graham Steele, people think, should be the next leader.
You know, you don't have to go very far in Halifax, David, to hear the name Graham Steele come up as a potential replacement successor for Darrell Dexter. The fact that he didn't run this time around might give him some years to make some connections, to meet some potential fundraisers, to get his campaign in order. As you mentioned, David, he represented a very safe NDP seat. He's also, you know, a very well-educated man. He's well-liked. He was the finance minister, and he is certainly a name that you hear over and over again when it comes to who might replace Darrell Dexter. All told, there were about 5 big-name NDPs, David, who did not run this time around. 5 of them from the Halifax area. 3 of them were ministers in Dexter's government, and I think we may well see some of those names come back. Estabrooks, whether it's Steele, Estabrooks, or some of the others, we could well see those names come back and try to replace Darrell Dexter, depending on Darrell Dexter's political future. Even if he wins his own seat, I think we would start hearing right away, as we did perhaps with Adrian Dix in British Columbia, David, we would start hearing talk right away about who is going to replace Darrell Dexter as the NDP leader.
But the key difference here, of course, and just to clue people in who may be watching this for the first time, it is not a BC NDP situation in that Dix, I'm certain, knew from the get-go the knives would be out for him. My sense is Dexter's been around since 2001. There's still a great amount of love for the things Dexter did. They will not be, the party there is not going to be quick to push him out. They'll expect him to make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's right, David, and I think certainly tonight might be too early, but you never know in politics. You never know what will come up in the concession speech, but certainly I think you're right. There was a lot of respect for Darrell Dexter. Remember, he took this party to government, something that had never happened east of Ontario. Darrell Dexter won a huge victory in 2009, and I think people are going to remember that, whereas it is a very different situation. I shouldn't have likened them, perhaps, said Adrian Dix and Darrell Dexter, 2 very different situations, but the end result might be the same. A loss on election night certainly doesn't bode well for the leader of a party, especially if you're the incumbent government and you go to third party status. That's not going to be a very good night for Darrell Dexter. If he loses his own seat, as I say, it goes from bad to worse for Darrell Dexter and the NDP.
I know you like fishing in the Atlantic, Bryn, so maybe we keep you there for Battleground Nova Scotia, the race for the next NDP leader. We might be doing that next week. All right, Bryn, thank you so much. We'll get back to you a little later on. Let's go to Ottawa now. John Robson is standing by. And John, last time we chatted, you and I was saying to Brian Lilly a minute ago, I think I agree with your assessment of the NDP strategy. It was probably the right one to do, but for whatever reason, circumstances just didn't work out for the New Democrats. And now we've got a new Liberal Premier. Long time since we've had a Liberal Premier in Nova Scotia. Your thoughts on Premier Stephen McNeil?
Well, as anybody in this country will discover once you get elected, the problems are in fact worse than you said they were, and your resources for dealing with them are more limited than you claimed on the campaign trail. Normally in Nova Scotia, if you win, you have a pretty good chance not merely of getting a second term, but of starting a dynasty. The first 13 of the first 14 elections after Confederation were won by one party in this province. But you know, one of the great problems with politics is that you get so focused on winning the election, you think of this as redemption, as salvation, as glory. It's all ours now forever, but there are no permanent victories in politics, and you have to get going the next day. You know what he said, I'll cut the GST if I can get the HST, if I can get the budget balanced, but I don't know how bad the numbers are. Well, what if they're bad? Then what do you do? So, you know, congratulations, now you've got a problem. You're the premier. So you celebrate, but don't stay up too late, because the next morning is going to come very early, and it may well not be terribly pleasant.
Well, and in this case, John, as well, McNeil was very careful not to paint him, not to make any budgetary promises that I guess we now say he shrewdly believed that he might not be able to keep. And when he gets into power and he looks at the books, he may be able to stand there and have a press conference and say, see, I told you so, and that's why I said we're not going to do this, that, or the other thing. Or he gets in and says, actually, it's not so bad, and maybe just before the next election, lowers the HST. Remember, Nova Scotia is the only province. I think I'm correct in saying only province that does not have a fixed election date. So McNeil is free to, as Dexter was, free to call things whenever he wanted it. For the Progressive Conservatives, let's chat a little bit about them. Of course, they were the team that Dexter kicked out. The team of Rodney McDonald was loathed, not liked at all, and. I wonder if Jamie Bailey and the PCs were still suffering from essentially a Rodney McDonald hangover. It looks like they're going to improve on their seat standing from 7 to 10. But is that enough? Is that looking up? I guess it is.
I think it's not what they were starting to hope for. They were obviously resigned to not forming the government, especially because Nova Scotians do not give rookie opposition leaders the premiership. But I think that party members in their hearts thought they were looking at more seats than they've seemed to be ending up with. And of course, the dismal reality is they've done quite well in the RONS, but they have not gotten into Halifax, and they have not gotten into the Sydney, what is it, the Cape Breton municipality it's now called. And if you don't win some of those urban ridings, the math is very difficult. I mean, 19 of the 51 ridings are in the Halifax regional municipality. And even if you do win, you don't have a kind of provincial mandate. To the point David Coletto was making, that the Liberals at the moment have got seats everywhere. They can honestly say Nova Scotians chose us. So the Tories have to ask themselves, first of all, how do we improve on our result generally, because the Liberals could get in and stay in? And secondly, how do we crack those urban areas? I mean, are we going to tack to the left? We're already a pretty left-wing party. Are we going to tack to the right and hope people are ready for a change? Or are we going to just wait for our opponents to do something bad? And if we can be as bland and nondescript as possible, notice our leader over here, maybe we'll win by default, as it may seem that the NDP actually did in 2009.
Thanks very much, John. I just want to pause for a second. We've got the Queen Shelburne board right up now, and I want to hold there. So that's Sterling Beliveau. He's an incumbent cabinet minister, Minister of Fisheries, Minister of the Environment. But Benson Frail's a bit of a story, and he's a Liberal candidate running in third right now. But he did have a bit of a story in that Benson commutes to work in Alberta. He is one of thousands in Nova Scotia who spends his week in Alberta, comes home on the weekends, works in the oil patch, has for a while. And that was one of the stories for this campaign, is who is going to bring the folks back home. Jamie Bailey actually took ads out in the Fort McMurray newspaper. And I don't see an easy solution or a quick solution to that, though I think it is an important problem for leaders in Atlantic Canada to apply themselves to.
Yeah, you've got to make your province a land of opportunity, and you don't do that with high taxes and subsidies to businesses. Not to, David Dingwall was saying, well, if you give money to businesses and they create jobs, you're fine. No, you're not. You're draining money out of the private sector to put it into the successful parapublic sector, and this is what has been wrong with Atlantic Canada for generations. You need somebody who's willing to say they have more jobs in Alberta. I mean, you look at the unemployment rate in Nova Scotia. What would it be if all those people couldn't go and work in Fort McMurray? Imagine how high it would be. You do that by cutting taxes, reducing regulation, getting rid of subsidies, turning this into a place to make your future. Even Jamie Bailey said, well, I want 1 million people in Nova Scotia. Great, yeah, and I'd like $1 million in a pony. But I haven't got a plan for getting $1 million. And he didn't really have a plan for getting 1 million Nova Scotians. And this, again, is Stephen McNeil's problem. Do you continue down the path that has seen Nova Scotia dwindle as a presence in Canada? Or do you make some bold break with the past? And he has no mandate for that. And Jamie Bailey isn't looking for one. So, that's a disappointing thing about the election, I think, from the point of view of everybody except the party that won it.
John Robson in Ottawa, thanks.